Well, all right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Engage. How was your day 1? Good? Excellent. Same, I have to admit. This is good stuff. Well, welcome to Making the Business Case for AI. I'm looking forward to this one. We're going to have a bit of a mix between some tech stuff and some real world stories, some ROI, some whys and some hows. It's going to be great stuff. So before I get there, though, I had a little message for all of you here. First of all, we're going to tell you about how the company that I work for, iSolutions, pivoted into offering AI services to our FileMaker customers, which I think is an important topic here at the conference this year in particular. And how, in fact, what we were doing was not just leveraging our existing client base, but believe it or not, our existing skill sets. And how we discovered later a lot of those actually mapped over to what we found to be important when you're providing AI services. So hopefully provide some comfort for those of you that are early on in that journey as well. And most importantly, I'm here to encourage you all to make that same pivot. I call it a pivot. That sounds a little bit more aggressive, but I'm here to hopefully encourage and empower you guys to do the same. And then, in the manner in which I'm going to tell that is by having a couple of my customers here as well. I'm going to talk about a couple of case studies today, 2 in particular. And as we go through each one, it's going to give me an opportunity to show you guys some interesting technologies and techniques and whatnot that we employed on the AI side. And then we'll have the voice of the customers actually talking about the problems they solved. And then we have 2 cases where we have some really interesting end state evaluations and some ROIs to talk about, so you can really truly see the impact of how you can implement AI into your FileMaker solutions and the upside for doing that. And I'm thrilled to have them here today. I'll introduce you to those guys here in just a second. Now, first, I'm Chris. Nice to meet you. This is me here. If you can read really fast and squint really hard. But I'm delighted to be here. This is my 54th DevCon session, actually. So I'm hoping to save the best for last for you guys. But first I want to tell you not just a little bit about myself, but mostly like my AI journey. And I'm saying this not to make this about me. I want you guys to identify maybe you're somewhere in this journey as well, or you know, what steps do you need to take, or how does an evolution like this start? I want it to sound familiar for all of you. And plus I think it was kind of a fun journey to kind of get here for myself. So first of all, how did I even get involved in AI at all? Well, I started with machine learning first. As a matter of fact, I started with a hobby. I have a passion for football combined with my background in data. Really made this machine learning and sports be the perfect intersection for me to get involved in this. And as a matter of fact, for those sports fans out there, sports data is uniquely perfect for evaluation in machine learning, and it has to do with the fact that the rules of the game actually provide structure for the data and continuity. And then some of these games, like the one I was obsessed with, are like 100 years old. So you actually have structured data going back almost 100 years. Now, no matter what it is that the outcomes that you're looking for, having that clean and of structured of data was really very useful. So that's how I learned terms like structured and machine learning. Actually, it wasn't even called machine learning back then. It was analytics was what everybody was calling this stuff. So what I ended up doing, I ended up merging those 2 things together, and somehow ended up collaborating with one of my with a data scientist that works with us at iSolutions now on a paper, a machine learning and sports paper back in 2013, which I thought was a lot of fun to actually, and this is just a hobby, you know, kind of having some fun with this whole thing. And then it got a little serious. Then I ended up turning into this guy, and I was a analytics expert for Sirius Sports Radio, and then later on the NFL Network for about 2 years there. And I took on a fake name so I didn't have to confuse any of you guys as you were Googling around for Chris, the FileMaker guy. But this was ages ago. They've thus since moved on. Frankly, back then, there were very few people even talking about machine learning in sports, and now it's like the #1 thing that people talk about. I had nothing to do with that. It was just pure coincidence, trust me. But at some point, it became very obvious, hey, you're sure spending a lot of time on this machine learning stuff, Chris. Why don't you go back and do some work, actually? You know, I got customers and stuff to take care of. And then the correlation of those 2 became very obvious to me, and it was really clear that we could leverage machine learning for business, especially because we're all in the FileMaker realm, so we're in the custom world. And a lot of the models that we were doing were custom. But then I started to see these patterns that even though we were going to build custom models, the use cases really were the same thing. We were seeing a lot of summarization or sentiment analysis or keyword extraction or categorization. And these were just really, really common things that you did not need to spin up a model for. In addition, CoreML, which was in 2017, which was provided to us by FileMaker, very powerful, but has limitations that it only runs on Mac OS, right? It requires, even now, it actually requires a silicon for Mac to be able to process. So I guess I would call that a limitation. What that had me do is start to look for, okay, well, let's say I want to categorize data then. Well, I went and found cloud-based models that would do the same thing. So what I was doing is removing the burden of the operating system restriction, and now I'm able to have even our Windows-based clients be able to actually connect and provide these same services. And what we were doing there was leveraging FileMaker's API support and JSON parsing support as well too, right? Native to the platform for quite some time now. So you don't need to wait on all the stuff that you've been hearing about this week or even last year. All this stuff we were able to do by just making API calls. So then that led to a pretty profound moment for me. This is quite old now, but then right after it became clear that connecting to cloud-based models was a thing that FileMaker can do really well, and we were kind of getting our muscles up on integrating those into workflows, this crazy model came out in 2020 that I had heard about called GPT-3. And I do not know how this happened, but somehow I ended up getting one of the first beta keys for this when they made it public. And this was that was literally the first silly thing that I did with AI, basically, was just a question and answer. Oh, what was I doing? Oh, I was telling my wife, how do I tell my wife I'm going to be home? I hit some traffic. Okay, interesting. Okay, anyway, so this is how working with GPT looked back in the day. But as you would imagine, now that some time has gone by, I found that there was a lot more incredible things that you could do with this model. Not only could it do all the things that we just talked about, summarization, categorization, sentiment analysis, but translations, and my gosh, you see the stuff that we're doing with it today, right? So that had us immediately take this whole thing very seriously. And what we ended up doing was officially spinning up it was a division at the time. Now we have a separate entity completely. And we've been proudly, actively deploying AI systems into market ever since. And we've been having a ton of fun with this. And a couple of these are going to be the subjects of our discussions here today. So before I get to all that, I have a message for everybody in the room. Bathrooms are down the hall, and lunch is served after this. No, actually, so take note of what really made it easy for us to transition into AI services. First of all, FileMaker developers are already close to the data. You might have heard that term a lot, but that's very meaningful. One of the things that we realized later in the game is that it's really all about data. I talked about how conveniently structured sports data is, like literally structured. That's not the case anywhere, especially, frankly, this is not a pejorative statement, but in the FileMaker world where, we got a lot more forgiveness in the way we structure our data. So the fact that we're all data professionals and we all are close to it, meaning we literally have access to our clients' data and we know the data, is a huge leg up on those that just know AI services to start with. And also, successfully integrating AI business applications requires a solid understanding of how to construct business applications themselves. Believe it or not, what you know inherently about how to put these systems together and how they relate together is one of the things that's kind of difficult for AI professionals to be able to wrap their heads around. And then we later found out that AI applications are not much different than the applications we're already creating. This provides a logic layer in a way for us to process data. It was almost like a calculation engine on steroids. So, frankly, we also found out that you don't need to be a data scientist to understand things like transformer technology. You just need to know how to make an API call and then to parse out the JSON that comes back, and then use your imagination after that point. Beyond that imagination, creativity, and problem solving will take you the rest of the way. So what I want to leave you guys with before I jump into these case studies is AI is not out of reach for any of you, and you can do this. I promise you. And you have fun doing it too. This is probably some of the most gratifying work technically definitely the most gratifying work technically that I've ever done in my career. So I hope to hear stories of the same from all of you. Okay, so first off, what I'd like to do is start off with our first case study. And hold on one sec. And I'm going to be helped through this with one of my colleagues here from 3M. Matt, why don't you come on up here and I'll introduce you here. So Matt Tandy, who's joining me up right here, is the Senior Manager of MarTech and Global Content Management at 3M. And Matt's going to help me tell the story about how we integrated AI into their FileMaker system and various changes and techniques that we did along the way. But first, I'm going to let Matt introduce everybody. Introduce yourself to everybody first. Go ahead, Matt.
Yep, perfect. Hello, everyone. So great to be here. Got to see a picture of me because you're so far back there. I will say Chris is doing a great job sounding corporate like 3M. He used the word pivot. I haven't heard him say cascade yet. We've got that one coming, and then he needs to finish every word or sentence with right. So that tends to be our thing in corporations. We feed off each other. But a little bit about me. I've been with 3M now for 15 years. Started with a company that they purchased out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and then I moved up to St. Paul, and then I moved back to North Carolina after COVID. I moved there, and then they said, hey, we can all work remote. I'm like, why did I just spend the money to move up here? So I spent the money again to move back to be with my kids. So I'm in the Winston-Salem, North Carolina area now. But interestingly, I've been working with FileMaker since, like most of you, probably FileMaker 3. At that point, it was, oh yeah, look at that, it's something. And then you got to 12, and then finally you got to relational databases. Back when I lived in San Antonio, doing a lot of proof of concept building in FileMaker with relational databases. But before that, I was in product content development, driving how do we use company data like 3M's data or other distributors like think of Granger's, people that have product data, how do we drive that into a usable system for customers to ingest? And that's through, back in the day, CD-ROM catalogs, if you were familiar with those, high tech at the time, and print catalogs. So using the same data that we had back then, we're using today, we just syndicate it differently and for different purposes. So coming to 3M, of course, you always have that problem statement that being in MarTech, and my focus is product content, global product content for a business group in 3M, which is the health and safety side, so masks and fall protection and things like that. Over 100,000 products is what we manage as far as content goes. Obviously needs a database to do that, but more importantly, what we have is the issue with updating the data, creating new data for new products. And with COVID, like many companies, we had to look at reductions, cost avoidance for what COVID brought us. And in that, unfortunately, we got hit with our copywriters have to move our copywriters out of the workforce, which at the time they were all contracts, so I didn't feel as bad necessarily. But you still feel bad that you have to reduce the workers. Well, at that point, then, talking with Chris, this was December, I think, of 22, we started talking about ChatGPT. And then after our long corporate, Christmas holidays we get every year, we came back in January. And by February, we had the proof of concept that I'm going to be talking more about today. But how do we get something done faster, more efficiently, and with cost avoidance in there? And obviously, with the introduction or bringing ChatGPT in here, it was amazing what we could do in efficiencies and bringing in compensating for the copywriters that we lost. So in ChatGPT 3.5, examples here. Chris is going to go through the prompting, so there's methods there, but output. I was getting outputs in 3.5, just wasn't that incredibly happy with consistency with the what we had to look at from a standardization process for that product content. And so I was doing manual comparisons when GPT 4.0 came over, and we started getting to see a little bit more capability and control over the output and how we worked with a prompt and driving it that way. Oh, that's okay. So you see the 4.0 did some things differently. Like 3.5, workers in a variety of situations can feel, it got very verbose, if you will, where our standardization in product content is, hey, we needed to start with the product name in this case, and then state the information afterwards that was more relevant. So as we started looking at, that was a short description, then long descriptions, a little bit about the same, but then it can't be the same as a short description. We have all these rules, of course, that we have to think about as we're syndicating that content, not only internal to our own website, but to our hundreds of distributors that it's consuming that same data. We want to make sure that we're driving that same information consistently across all products as we go there.
So the primary issue with using ChatGPT to generate anything from a business standpoint was while Matt had a lot of success because 3M's catalogs and partner websites are heavily indexed within the training data that was used for training these models, you absolutely cannot rely on the truth of that at all. So, so what I mean by that is if you saw, here I'll just show you, if you look really close in these descriptions, it's actually talking about the such and such, Secure Fit X5000 series. But you have absolutely no idea whether or not the truthfulness of this is accurate. And of course, that's of critical concern, frankly, for these guys, is that the product descriptions that they're generating need to be truthful. So this is what I tell people all the time, and this is very important when it comes to what I refer to as latent intelligence. And that is never trust it for business purposes. Instead, introduce your own truth into this process. And the way that we did that was pretty easy because we had built for them a product database. You'll see it referred to as PCM here. It contained all of the most relevant information from a product standpoint. So what we needed to do in that case is instruct the language model to ignore its own latent intelligence, what it thinks it knows about these products, and instead have it only evaluate data we were sending to it. So what you're seeing here is, is actually a snippet from the data payload in the API call we're sending out of FileMaker. So literally this looks like a let function because that's the same concept that we use to actually bring the data from whatever record we were on into the API call. So what that meant was we're still getting the power of having it write and follow instructions and sound like humans, but we're getting truth in here. Very, very important point. So I mean, I've yet to, we're going on like 5 years now, I've yet to find a good use case for just letting people just raw dog it against ChatGPT. And I don't think I'll find many soon. So it's really all about the trust in that case. So what we ended up doing, just as an idea, this is what a prompt looks like with all those included. This is just an example of a prompt structure. If you don't have a prompt template or structure that you follow now, this is a great place to start. But the thing that you'll notice on the top is that we're doing inputs. So imagine creating a calculation in FileMaker that will output this. Pretty easy to do, actually, especially when most of this is just raw text and you can just store it in a field and send it over if you want to. But the stuff on the top is where we're doing the let, or we're setting variables with the product information. Then we're referring to the product information later in the prompt. So much like I say let function because you set what the variable names are and what they stand for. You can do the same thing inside your prompts and just refer to them. So if I say up there product identifiers and I say here's this big huge block of product identifier information, I don't have to embed it all the time into the prompt. So that's kind of a nice little easy technique for you there. The last thing I'll show you is this little section that gets added on the bottom. For those of you in the back, it says constraints. And every single one of these is something that you're telling the model not to do. And constraints are critically important. And constraints are also the first thing I look at when somebody asks me to look at their prompts. Because what that tells me is you've tested them at least once. Because what happens after you test them is all the stuff you don't want it to do. Avoid summary phrases. What was the example you gave before? Flowery statements or whatever as well. Use North American spelling. Exclude any trade names not owned by 3M. Avoid like all this stuff. So I would dare say that you just keep testing until you're repeating yourself in the constraints, which is probably a good tip on how to do that. So so now we're constructing this. So now we're constructing this prompt as we go, and one of the things that Matt mentioned earlier was the formatting or the output of these product descriptions. So you'll see in a second when we go through the demo real quick that in addition to those big long descriptions for each product, we're also doing these. What would we call these again, Matt? I don't want to use the other brand name that we were referring to when we said the format on those.
A very large distributor format.
Yeah, there you go. They're just little snippets. So for those of you in the back, it's like
they're bullets.
All bullets basically, all caps for the name of the thing that they're qualifying, and then some other language. So Matt and I kind of struggled with this. He's like, this is what the output needs to be, and so I would just say, see if you guys look at the very top, I said the format would be key phrase, colon, and then short description. You see how I'm using like the brackets? It's really the same kind of things with variables and merge, for example. It's all those same principles here. So at first it was just that. And I would get it every now and then. I'd send it to Matt, and he'd be like, yeah, great, I did 20 more, and now it's sliding a little bit. So this was the first time that I had used a technique that's called few-shot prompting. And this essentially, in plain English, it means provide a bunch of examples of what it is that you're trying to do. So instead of wrestling through prompts and saying, do this, don't do that, and always start with this, and da-da-da, just say, here's 5 examples of perfect format for this. And almost instantly, the second we started providing these, which by the way, these work really well towards the end of your prompt, because if you saw that original database I was playing with, the old way to work with GPT was that you would have to prompt and set these sequences. Like you saw me do question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, and then I go, here's my question, now you answer. That's how these models are. I mean, that's literally what they are, is completion, probabilistic completion algorithms. So this allows it to set that format. So this is an example of few-shot prompting for format outputting. And one little twist on this is that what I was really saying, what I said to Matt was, give me some examples of this. And I said, wait, give me the 5 best examples you can find. Like, your copywriters had done a really good job. What's like the perfect way to do it? Because after all, we're instructing the model on what to do, and we want it to be perfect. So this idea popped out of here. As it turns out, there was already something in the database where reviewers could go in and rate how the output of the system, 1 through 5, what the output of the system was. So we thought, oh, this is perfect. That is actually an example of human reinforcement, or human in the loop reinforcement. And the more you can do that, the better. So what we ended up doing then is, instead of hard coding into our prompt, here are just those 5, instead what we do is a database call, pick the top 5 highest rated by humans, and then have that do it. And so what's interesting about this is that if all of a sudden humans start like preferring some format over another over time, it starts to get reflected dynamically in your prompting. So this is a database call that actually inserts that into the prompt moving forward. So that was kind of a fun, refer to that as a dynamic few shot. So now, actually, Matt's gonna walk through the demo here. I'll fire it up when you're ready. So this is actually you want to set it up first, and then I'll hit play?
So this is the FileMaker database. I said I originally did a proof of concept and then had iSolutions come in, and they rewrote it because they didn't like the way I did it. He never said that, but I'm sure Ethan would agree. He saw my programming.
Ethan said that.
Yeah, Ethan said it. But it's PCM, product content management. It's all about the visualization of literally millions of records when we look at translated content as well, to help and assist our product marketers, our product content leads, to be able to view our content in a couple screens that's relevant to them. So in doing so, this is perfect for the proof of concept of AI. When I'm bringing in, how do we rewrite content? How do we do legal checks? How do we look at related product content? So we have this product, what goes with it? When I originally was looking at this, I was amazed at how much AI knew about our products that I didn't realize they knew. Because they're pulling from public data. But like Chris showed in the prompts, when we're bringing in product specifications and existing descriptions, product brochures, all of that is internal to 3M. Well, it is all public data. And by the way, I couldn't show you any of this unless it was public data anyway. But so, it's all information that we have in our ecosystem itself. And we'll talk about that soon as we look at embedding and vectorization, how powerful this is for companies that you probably work with every day to use their content to drive AI as the brain behind it, because that's what we're all concerned about. So when we hit that AI button with the little robot head, it goes through and it does a automatic rewrite of the description, long description. We do a legal check. So what do our paralegals look for in exaggerated claims, no unsubstantiated claims or guarantees that are there. Then we look at the bullets. So you can see, click of a button, it creates the 5 bullets that are most relevant. And we set those parameters around all of that. Industries that these are best sold in, so you think of that sales opportunity that we have to help our sales teams, related products, select what we're looking for in that related product, what it sees most being sold with, in this case a helmet, and it'll provide those examples, which then we could just add to that. Keywords, SEO value, always huge. We did this example by industry, so give us keywords in consumer, industrial, construction, so we can look at, eventually dynamically creating keywords based on a user profile that comes to a website. I'm in the construction industry. It's going to show them their information dynamically when it comes to that. The other aspect is the brand voice. So when we look at brand voice, of course, 3M, we've got to be 3M, just like Apple. Everybody has a brand that they want to stick to. Our brand voice is something that could not be not used. We had to have AI write in the voice that was consistent with 3M guidelines themselves. So you can see an excerpt here from one of our business groups, Global Marketing Center, copy style guide. I originally gave this to Chris. It was probably, 80 pages or so, because it's the marketing center actually creating the brand. So we had to make it beautiful and verbose and probably a lot of pretty colors and examples. But here's some examples, how we write addresses, how 3M standardizes how we write addresses, what kind of adverbs do we use, ampersands, whether we do it, and or the ampersand and that sort of thing is incredibly important when it comes to that.
So when Matt gave me this document, it was more than 80 pages, by the way. It was a treasure trove of information and instruction. I mean, if you really think of what language models are good at, they're good at language. They're better at language than any of us are. And so this is just language rules. And I was salivating when I saw this. The problem was this was back when the largest context window available was 36,000 tokens. And this document was over 10,000 tokens in of itself. So this was the first time I actually got to do an AI compression. So what I ended up doing was taking the entire document, putting it into a model, and then going through this process where I just say, look, take out all the noise, essentially. Here's a structure that I noticed that they had a section that had examples that was separate from where the rules were. So I said, go find all the examples and follow them right after the rules. It's almost like a little mini few shot type thing, if you look at it that way. So what ended up happening is after doing that compression, and then some of the terms that I use when I do that, I say redo this lossless and reduce noise. I always use the lossless term because then it knows, okay, I got to keep the information here and the rules intact. So the lossless reformatted version of this optimized for the prompt was only about 3,200 tokens. So I got rid of 2/3 of the size of it was just noise. So the cool thing about it is you're wondering, well, what is 3,200 tokens worth of this document? Where does it go? We literally stuff it right into that prompt. So one of the variables, just like I said, product descriptions was a variable and product specifications was a variable that we're feeding into the data payload that we send to the API. Literally this entire document gets sent over there. Now, what I would say is later we find that make it a separate API call. For this, you could send the API call to do the description, then have the description come back, and then send that one along with these rules to get scrubbed and returned back to you. Doing multiple calls like that when you have this type of filtering or evaluation is a great process for it. And then once we solved this problem, well, another bigger one arose.
So anything we write has to go through an approval workflow, obviously. So it goes through product marketers, application engineers, making sure that everything that is written, whether it's by AI or by human, it has to be approved. Legal is that last step in there. So I had the opportunity to sit through a deposition, 2 days, 8 to 9 hour deposition.
Unrelated to this project. I just want to point that out. Yeah. No way, shape,
unrelated. Of a product where we have to, as a marketer, we have to say who wrote this, who approved it, why was it saved, and I mean so many things, which is actually one of the things that made me write PCM in the first place, is that accountability of updating information, saving it in a place that we can go back to it and see that responsibility train, if you will, for our product content. Well, with legal, obviously there's always bottlenecks when it comes to approval processes. And we quickly figured out that if AI can help alleviate some of those steps in what we're writing, then it would be perfect. So we went through and talked with the paralegals and said, okay, when you're reviewing product content, what do you look for? What phrases, what legal stuff I'll put in there, do you look for? And if we can alleviate some of the bottlenecks, it's not only making the whole process more efficient by using AI, but it's saving us money. We call it cost avoidance, saving us money in the whole process. But looking at this, it's all about it's all about making sure that our legal is covered, and we get to the point.
Yeah, I'll show you. So one thing I wanted to show you guys here is, see on the very top where it says legal guidelines, and I just call it a variable there. That actually is where we actually stuff all the documentation that we get from legal. So the other thing, so while we were doing this process, because we wanted to keep the humans in the loop, so to speak, I was really proud of this idea here. And also, you see there's a theme here, right? We're keeping the humans involved in this process as much as we can. We're going to go through a couple other examples of that too. But in order to, we were never going to have AI do all the legal decisions on its own. It's just irresponsible and not necessary. And as Matt alluded to, we were just trying to relieve bottlenecks. So what we ended up doing was doing a prompt. This is the sort of the pseudo prompt. I'm not including the exact one. This reads better. But essentially we're saying, I'm sorry, actually you saw it. In blue down there, it's more verbose than that, but essentially you get the idea. Rate all legal concerns independently on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the least concern, or 1 being the least concern and 5 being the greatest concern, and then insert guidelines as well, right? So this is the output that we would get. So we could do this as a JSON. It actually is JSON. So you get the description on the top where it actually identifies what the claim is that it finds as a risk, talks about why it's a risk, then gives a risk level, which is a different object that we can pull from the JSON block that comes back. And then what we do is route, then we end up routing only the level 4s and 5s to actual human legal reviewers, and the 1s through 3s allow for processing through. And this is what it looks like in production as well, to give you an idea.
Yeah, from an interface perspective, again, it's about being able to show the user what they see. So you're seeing the highlighting there, and then this. Sorry, Chris, I didn't include the risk level on this side. It may be on the next one.
There's another one, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so it would show the risk level here. And just to prove it out, basically what I did is added in this line: this heat shrink tubing will save your life from any danger. Obviously, we wouldn't write that, but if we did,
like the Roadrunner.
Yeah, heat shrink tubing. But obviously, AI legal claim, it says revise the statement to avoid guaranteeing life-saving capabilities. I suggest saying it's designed to provide protection in various applications. Very corporate and legal sounding, but gives it a severity level 5. So the idea is a 4 and a 5 would not progress a request for an approval process. Thus, this would never see legal. We would make sure that that's corrected using this AI functionality before it even got into the system itself.
So you've seen a couple of examples here where, first of all, the takeaways from this is do not rely on latent intelligence within the models for, frankly, anything you're doing. I can tell you half a decade of delivering solutions to customers, and we have yet to have one request or need to actually rely on the latent intelligence side of a model. I don't know if you're hearing that enough. We're in the age of proprietary data anyways, so the models don't need to get smarter. They're incredibly capable. They just need your data. And you can do that very securely, and it will provide the customization that you need, that you're already used to doing within your custom database applications. And then of course, keeping the humans in the loop. You don't have to, we weren't just doing it on purpose. You just don't have to rely on the models or you rely on the models to make the decisions, even with your human-based instruction. Have humans in there. We're going to show you another example of that in a second. Now, the great news is that the outcome of this was, I'll let Matt do it because he got to get the hardware.
So just like I expect an award from Claris Engage for my speaking abilities today, the PCM, the system itself and platform did win the Global Marketing Excellence Award last year, primarily for this AI enablement piece to that, because we're able to look at what kind of cost savings do we bring the company, the efficiencies, do more with less kind of idea with that. So across the board, the PCM platform itself has really expanded to all of 3M, so all business groups are using it, not just my one out of the 4 business groups, and the AI enablement is huge for that.
Okay, so we did some other stuff that's really cool that we look forward to telling you. So now that we had this big success, they're just letting us do whatever we want, basically. Pretty much, right? But the idea was still about saving money and introducing efficiencies at the enterprise level. So one of the things that Matt wanted to tackle, he mentioned before that he had an issue with copywriter availability. Also, one of their very large cost centers was translations, as you can imagine, right? And right about this time, we were getting the 4.0 models that had the 35 different language support in there. And we did some testing with translation. So first off, translations is one of the more fascinating things, applications that you can use models for. But here's the problem. A very quick anecdote. The gardener at my house speaks Spanish. And there's a special little area where I put like my dog's, remains, and I didn't want him to put like seed on it or whatever. And so I wrote him a letter in ChatGPT because I don't speak Spanish. And so respectfully, I send a letter and I go, wait, hold on, let me just, this is an experiment you should do yourself. Write the letter, then you get the Spanish version. Now ask it to take the Spanish version and go back to English. And it said, good day, sir. May I trouble you for a moment about the grass on my front yard? And I'm like, I don't talk like that. So don't rely on just pulling the lever and it sounds good.
He does to me, it's in our contract.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. It's part of the award. As it turns out, by the way, I did hand it to my gardener and he read the whole thing and he's like, I speak English, dude. So, anyways, I don't speak Spanish. So, what's really fascinating is if you look at embeddings, and you've heard of cosine similarity, right? That's the stuff. That part was of what was introduced last year. The cosine similarity values. So this says 92%. That's not true, but you can at the early stages of learning this. Think of 0.92 cosine similarity as very close. 1 means they're the exact same thing. So what this is fascinating is this is read in English, and SOS, Ronnie, give it to me. Thank you. All right. Is actually a 0.92 translation, like an acceptable, very good translation. Now, the key is acceptance. So this is where we brought humans back into the loop. So Matt, I'll let you talk about the process, how we got humans to verify what our acceptance threshold would be. So I'm sorry, the threshold would be not 0.92. What level and higher would be enough for us to just say that's good, ship it, basically? And this is what we did.
Yeah, so in essence, built a proof of concept platform for translation. So we just, very quick and easy. We have our data there to the right, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and I had my local translators or reviewers come through here and review it and give it this score, which we brought into the overall system as part of, what can we use for AI to help judge whether it's a good translation or not. Interestingly enough, out of the review feedback, they just clicked a button on overall translation, contextual, technical, consistency translation, and then any notes they added. But we averaged, it was about 300 different lines that I had them review and translate. We averaged like an 8.2 just naturally out of the GPT translation. Granted, Spanish, Portuguese, we all know, it's better at that anyway, but it is getting better. As we translate in 36 different languages. It's a little bit tough in like Korean, but it's getting better actually. So seeing that was huge. To know that we're on the right track with translations. And not to mention, you kind of talked about ROI, but any company like 3M, think of Claris, Apple, we're translating in so many different languages. Imagine if we're taking 99% of the cost out of this because of what we're doing with AI. You're literally saving millions of dollars a year by presenting this using AI.
Now, Matt can't give you the actual numbers, but he can give you the actual percentage, and he might have just said it. So think of eliminating a cost that are almost down to zero, frankly. In this case, that was very profound. So in review, what we had done here is made sure that humans who could understand this and rate it, and what was there? There was like 300 of these evaluations or something like that. So it didn't take a large set. We ultimately determined that the score of the translations that was around an 8 then essentially we then go look behind the scenes and see what the correlated number of the cosine similarity is. So what we do is it's kind of like a blind test, like, hey, humans, which one of these are good? And then we go, thank you. And then we look behind it and go, oh, looks like a 0.83 is our acceptable threshold by the humans, which essentially means now, moving forward, the humans, we know then that the humans, they could be evaluating every single one of these, and we know what they would say is acceptable. So that's how you keep humans in the loop. So as a quick wrap up here, what are some of the things 3M is doing now with these huge wins and cost savings that iSolutions brought to them and were not compensated appropriately for?
Well, I have shamelessly created all of this by AI. This is what manufacturers are doing, because I'm not going to tell you what 3M is doing, because you'll take it and become 3M yourself. So, but you can see some of the things, when we look at supply chain, manufacturing capabilities, truly manufacturing. So every step of manufacturing, AI is involved with. And then as we look into what marketing is doing, I'm sure you all have seen and read about and know pretty much what can be done with using AI in marketing. So very exciting time now with AI in marketing.
If you want more details on this, just posted a Medium article. You can see it on LinkedIn if you guys follow me on LinkedIn, that details some of the stuff that we talked about here in case you want to share this with others as well. So now, thank you very much, Matt. How about a hand for Matt? And now I move on with my customer reinforcement presentation, and I want to talk about a different use case. And this is actually a callback to last year when I was here. I talked about the concept of, so embeddings were just being released. And again, you keep hearing semantic search. Ronnie and I'm going to say Ronnie's just as frustrated as I. It's not just about semantic search. It's about what makes semantic search possible, and that's the fact that you can embed text and then do this cosine similarity. So it really should have been embedding in vector support with cosine similarity support, and oh, by the way, search. That's how you should really look at the stuff that's in product now. Well, soon to be more stuff. So the reason I was coming up with this example, this is not one that I had as a customer story. I was just imagining that this might be a good way to do it. So what I was basically talking about back then was this idea of it's like vectorizing a resume and vectorizing a job description, which I imagine at the time might lead to some interesting results. And because actually you can do that. It's not just about vectorizing a single word. You can do a sentence, you can do an entire document, you can do tons and tons of documents, and there will be some level of similarity. So we'll talk about how that works here in a second. But the reason you want to do stuff like that is that it picks up different nuance. Like you might see a job post that says communication skills could actually be a match to excellent written and verbal abilities, even though they don't use the same words, right? So it really is an ideal way to do this type of matching. Really elevate some potential candidates that maybe you weren't even looking at. And it can really capture deeper relevance between candidates and job openings than humans based on just keyword searches, which before AI was pretty much the case. So what we ended up doing then was, and Kate will talk a little bit about her journey from this room into this process and back to this room here in just a moment. But just to let you guys know what this is a sample of what we ended up doing. So this idea sounded great to Kate, so we went through some experiments. The first experiment we did, we referred to as a brute force. We'll talk more about the outcome of it in a second. But we literally took the entire job position document, extracted, which you can now use with the what function? PDF. Yep, so you could actually extract the PDF into text natively within FileMaker. And then natively, also, you can turn them into vectors. If you guys haven't seen vectors, these are what vectors look like. Not much human readable, nothing human readable, frankly, in there at all. Then on the flip side, what we did was do the same thing on the resumes, right? Take the resume document, extract all the text, vectorize all that. And then that number that you see on the bottom is actually the cosine similarity between the two big blocks of vectors that I just showed. It really is that simple to do this type of matching. The problem is, as you see, 0.47, those are not great matching scores. So even though I had thought I was really clever with this might be a really good use case, and someone came up and said, yeah, we'll actually pay you to do that, it wasn't that great, actually. And it probably has a lot to do with the fact that there's so much noise. Also, as you'll learn in a little bit, there's a lot of these documents are very verbose. So because we wanted to provide value to our customer, we had or I keep thinking this is a slide. I came up with this idea of introducing ontology into this. And so here, and this actually ended up working out really well, as I'll have Kate explain in a second. So it's the same document, the same job description, but instead of taking the whole big block, what we did is we broke it into these like 6 or 7 different metrics. And this idea came from the fact that they already were using, these aren't the real ones, but they were already using a way to break these things down to create the job posting in the first place. So I thought, oh, this is going to be a consistency of the structure of the data moving forward. So what we did is some really sophisticated prompting to extract, based on tons of rules, or actually more so on the resume side, I should say. We basically just extracted the different fields that make up the document. And then on the resume side, this is where some heavy lifting really came in. We created the same sections on the resume side, but if you think to yourself, scope of position, this is a person, what do you mean scope of position? So what we had to do is do some like really sophisticated reverse logic on how to actually fill this out to basically say, based on this resume, this would be the statement in a job position that they would be best suited for. Does that make sense? It's kind of twisted, but language models are excellent at this. So there's a prompt for each one of these. There's all sorts of different calls going on here. There's a series of different calls that are actually happening. Then what we did was, instead of giving it one big score from the resume to the job posting, we gave it individual scores, right? So now we have all these different individual scores, which could have been enough, except that we really liked having one score. God, it's not a slide, Chris. So instead, so we did the same thing. So the position side had the score as well too, back to the resumes. And we weighted them, exactly. So what we ended up doing, I had to go back to my old machine learning days, and this is probably one of the most common types of machine learning. This is regression. This is, if you ever say the word average to a data scientist, they'll scorn, and they will be thinking about this instead. So instead of averaging those, well, by the way, there's a lot of value in having these individually, because now the client can say, well, what is it about this one resume that is such a match for this job? And it's this piece because it's greater than that piece, right? So they had all this granular data, but we still wanted to have the overall score. So we apply this formula here, and we come up with what the match is. So it's all these different matches weighted into that match above. Now the key is also that when the client is setting up the position, they're able to put the weights in themselves. And when you weight something, it's just a bunch of values that equal up to 1. Essentially, right? So now the client can say on this particular job, work experience is more useful, and so on and so on. So they have control over that. Okay, finally, and then I'm going to bring Kate up to talk about this. We did one last thing, and this was sort of a fever dream that I had about doing an ideal state. And this is another kind of clever way to do matching. So what I ended up doing here is extracting, or no, actually in the same kind of manner before, where I was using a prompt to fill those little fields. I then went over to the job description and said, more than this, but essentially, give me the ideal candidate for this job, right? And then did the same thing on the other side, go into the candidate or the resume and say, what's the ideal position for them? And then, as you can imagine, vectorized both of these blocks of text, did this, the cosine similarity of the two, and ended up getting some good scores there. So with all that said, let's talk about how this actually landed with our client. I'd like to introduce to you guys, I don't know how much anonymity you want, but Kate. So come on up here and give Kate a hand for a second here. Here you go. Excellent. Mic check.
Mic check.
Oh.
Nope. Power on. Mic check.
Okay, I guess.
Hello, hello.
Is it working?
Wonderful. Fabulous. Thank you, Chris. Thank Chris and his team for the incredible work that they did on that. You saw there was math. And honestly, this all started last year in this room. I was sitting on the floor over there because it was standing room only. He had for about 2 minutes a slide up there that had a position description and a resume, and my mind was blown because I am the database developer for the firm that we're talking about, and we live our lives with resumes and position descriptions. So it's my world. And I left the room and cornered him in the hallway, and I said, have I got a use case for you? And the rest is history. So one more little vignette. Before the conference last year, I had taken a look at all the sessions, and it was very, very heavily AI, if you were all here. And I was a little bit baffled at that moment in time because I really hadn't been exposed to much of it. And I was driving my 20-year-old son back to college, and we were in the car, and I said, it's a lot about AI, honey, and I'm a little a little, stressed about that. And he said, "Oh, Mom, it's all about matching. It's just all about matching. Don't worry about it." And you know what? Lo and behold, I think he's pretty right about that. So for any of you who are feeling a little overwhelmed about this whole AI thing, I offer you that. It's a lot about matching with a little math thrown in. So there's that. But that demystified it for me, and I was grateful. So this next slide, next way, is I just present this one to you for any of you who are a little more visual. I know Chris went through a lot of those FileMaker screens, and that was really helpful. But this is just a little bit of a visual, just showing you how we did the resumes and the cover letters and so forth, all those documents, thousands and thousands of documents that we have, and we compared them to the position specifications, and we came out with the scores, the ideal candidate scores, et cetera. And then the other visual here is just how we weighted them, and just a visual way to see what he was just showing you, just for those of you who are a little bit more on the visual side. And then next, I want to just give you a little bit more context on what we're working with, what kind of firm this is, what we're doing. And also to pause and explain a little bit about AI and hiring, and maybe some of you have heard a little bit. CNN did a recent podcast on AI and hiring, and I just want to speak to that a little bit. Maybe some of you are even skeeved out. Our computer is going to be making hiring decisions going forward, and just a little bit about that. So there's a lot about out there right now. So what executive search firms do, our job is to build broad, deep candidate pools so that the client can make a hiring decision. We are not making the hiring decisions as the search firm. We're just providing a broad, deep pool of candidates. We also vet the candidates. So before presenting the pool of candidates, we're doing background checks, making sure that they have the credentials. If they say they have a PhD, we're making sure they have that PhD. That's our job. So the broad, deep candidate pool and vetting those candidates. AI has a potential to assist in both of those things. It's my humble opinion, AI should not be making a hiring decision, ever. It's my humble opinion. 3 points of context with regard to this particular executive search firm. We are working largely in higher education administration. We're not hiring faculty members, higher education administration largely. We are dealing with very long resumes, sometimes called curriculum vitae. We're talking 30 plus pages in many instances. Keyword search is not working for us, okay? We're also working with hiring committees, not a single hiring manager. Adds complexity to our situation. Okay. This particular slide, I put some stuff in red just so it can jump out at you. So one of the things that came up when we decided what to provide Chris with and his team, to what data to provide, what we could work with to do some testing and some experimentation with some of the data that we had. We had a client that came to us with a search to help them with. And when it all shook out, they hired someone. And interestingly enough, that person left in a fairly short period of time. Bummer. Well, they loved us, and so they hired us back to refill the position after this, again, fairly short period of time. That gave us an instance to provide Chris and his team with a second set of candidates, right, in a fairly short period of time. Same job, let's fill it again. It was just interesting. It was just an interesting situation that we could give him two sets of candidates for the same job, right? So that's what you're seeing here, sort of search one, search two, et cetera. So just an interesting, all of this is in hindsight, remember? All of this has already been done. We're just looking at the two sets of applicants for the job that were presented to the client. Now, what you're seeing here is what happened. The person that took the job and then left in that short period of time, we took all of this data and percentiled it, right? Math again, sorry, but percentiles. So the lower numbers were people that didn't score as well. That person who took the job and left after that shorter period of time was in the 30th percentile. The second round, when we did the job the second time, the person who took the job and is still in the job, loving the job, they're loving that person, all good, 90th percentile. Kind of fascinating how it all shook out like that. it was really intriguing. Okay, so again, obviously all that was hindsight, but really just interesting stuff. So I'm going to switch gears for a little bit here, because as it turns out, we're not probably going to use it a whole lot to evaluate the candidate pools as they, interestingly enough. So, but remember what I said about the main thing that the firm is charged with, the broad, deep candidate pools. So going out and getting that put together on behalf of the client. So identifying the right candidates. AI is going to allow us to match the potential candidates more precisely with those position descriptions, helping us build those broad, deep candidate pools. That's number one. We will always want to perform the targeted outreach, honing that targeting, sharpening a blade. That's exactly what we want to do. Nobody wants to get calls from the headhunters, in the vernacular, that for the job that's not appropriate for you, right? So that's number one, being more targeted. And then even going beyond that. So here's the idea. So we send that outreach. Some people just aren't going to reply, right? You're just not going to get the response. But with that percentiling that I was talking about a minute ago, we're going to take a look at those people that are in the 80th and the 90th percentile, the people where that match, where the AI has said the match is really tremendous. We're going to take a second look at that group, and we're going to say, Scott, is this worth a second look? Because that match, your 90th percentile, we're not going to say that to Scott. We're not going to tell you that the AI said your 90th percentile, Scott, right? We're not going to say that. But we know that, and we're going to just put it under Scott's nose one more time. We're calling that secondary targeted outreach, because we just know that based on Scott's experience, background, education, all of that stuff, we know it's a match, and it really should noodle Scott to think really about that job. Okay. Now, this session is making the business case for AI. The firm has been expanding into nonprofits and secondary school administration for the past 5-8 years. And we've got, as I said, tens of thousands of resumes, cover letters, and other documentation already in the database. We're just swimming in documents. Well, as they're trying to broaden the base of the firm, the better we are at being able to understand and read these documents and do this matching, this is where senior management went, oh, wow, this is fabulous. Because the broader the firm can be in, shall we say, the current climate in higher education and what's happening, this is fabulous for them. I mean, this is just fabulous, because the broader the firm can be, the better. So the business case for AI, fabulous. And then one last thing having to do with what Chris was saying in the beginning, being able to take what Chris's team provided for us and integrate that into our existing scripting, our existing business processes with the skills, my FileMaker skills, my existing skill set. That's what he started out with. That's tremendous. And it's to Chris and his team that I'm so grateful.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Thank you. Great job. So quick wrap here. So yeah, it's super exciting. So yeah, I'm not good on percentiles myself, but what this means is that in the human case, humans came up with, the first candidate was in the 30th percentile, and then humans then came up with another one who happened to be in the 90th percentile. The first choice for AI was the individual in the 90th percentile, which is kind of interesting. So again, pointing out that it does embellish the human process. You heard that this is not going to replace any decisions at all. And then integrating in using your existing FileMaker scripts. At this point, it's just a matter of making API calls and parsing out that data into the appropriate places in FileMaker. So the real takeaways here are first of all, don't remove humans from the loop, which is what the terminology is there. try to leverage that input as much as you can. Don't forget that embeddings are not just about semantic search. It's absolutely about matching as well too. The combination of embeddings and your cosine similarities are all about matching. And that employing AI for business is not just about following the hype cycle, but actually seeing very real bottom line improvements for you and gains, and being able to even open up your business into new industries and sectors that maybe you didn't think were possible before. So with that said, go forward, new AI people, and do the same within your own organizations. Look forward to talking to you guys in the hallways about all this real soon. Cheers. Thank you, everybody.